All right, so good morning, everyone, and welcome to IEA Kenya's 13th webinar for the year 2024. My name is Winnie Ogejo, and I work at the Institute of Economic Affairs. And just to tell you what we're about, the Institute of Economic Affairs is a public policy think tank that is based in Nairobi, Kenya. And what we do is we use our research findings and our research capability to engage in public policy discourse on different topical issues, such as the one we are going to be engaging in today. So the IEA runs across 6 programs. So we have the Competition Law and Economics program, the Public Finance Management program, the Economic Regulation and Competition program, the Popular Economics program, the International Trade program, and yours truly, the Futures and Foresights program. So your hosts today are the Futures and Foresights program and the Popular Economics program. So our topic today is just Kenya in 2040, mapping Kenya's future. And what is this about? So as we will be proceeding, you will be able to understand a little bit about scenarios building and why scenarios building is important. And we would love to interest you in this publication that we worked with together with an organization based in South Africa, the Oxford Economics Africa. And we worked on these scenarios for a period of about 1.5 years. And we have these findings that we are glad to share with you. We will be sharing with you in the end the publication, which is readily available on our website. And as we proceed, just a few housekeeping. You will be on mute as we begin, all through to the plenary session, where you will be given rights to then raise any questions you have and voice it if you feel. And as we also proceed, you will have an opportunity, should you have any questions as we will be engaging, you will have an opportunity to type in your question on the chat box. And as Kwame and myself will be proceeding with the presentation, we will also be looking at the chat box and trying to respond to some of the questions you will be having. But if you can wait until the end, then why not? You will have an opportunity to ask your questions at that point. So today's conversation, we will take you through the background of this report that we did, the methodology that we did, and then we will dig into the scenarios just to take you through the 4 different scenarios that we built out of a few things that we will be discussing in the coming slides. So I've given you a very quick background of what our webinar is about today. But before we go into the details, we want you to understand what scenarios are. And out of an amalgamation of different descriptions of what scenarios are, we as the IE are describing scenarios as descriptions or outlines of possible sequences of events or hypothetical situations. We are also saying scenarios are narratives or stories that help explore potential developments in the future based on different factors, assumptions, or conditions. And these different factors, assumptions, and conditions are not made up. These are actually our reality and what we will be calling in the coming slides, our picture of now. So the different factors that you are using to build your scenarios are not made up. They are things that you can actually relate with and can actually identify in your day-to-day life. And of course, why scenarios? And we are saying scenarios give us an opportunity to we are using scenarios as tools that can be used to envision different outcomes and prepare for potential challenges or opportunities in the face of uncertainty. The keyword here is uncertainties. And as we are preparing for potential challenges or opportunities in the face of uncertainties, we are also reminding you that as we are having this conversation, please have at the back of your mind that scenarios are not predictions. There are actually just possibilities of what could happen in the future. Some of these possibilities could play out and some might not play out. But evidently, these scenarios would play out. And that is why when we are building scenarios, remember we are saying Kenya in 2040, we are giving it a time space where somebody who has read our scenarios today, if they were to reflect on these scenarios in 2040 and bump into our publication, they can actually internalize and look at these scenarios and see, did they play out or did they not play out? So we are giving it some life by allowing a generation to actually be here to witness whether or not these scenarios play out. So remember, scenarios are not predictions, they are just possibilities. And then, of course, we go into our methodology. So these scenarios, even for us at the IEA, were very, very interesting for two reasons. Normally, people are used to having scenarios that are majorly qualitative. That is, you read a story narrative, which for us we are calling a journey narrative. But for us to make it more practical and relatable, we incorporated the technical narratives where we used quantitative data. So the quantitative data were not made up. This quantitative data are actually our reality at the point we were writing these scenarios, which is in 2022. So as we will be going ahead, I will be taking us through our journey narratives, and then Kwame will be taking us through the technical narratives. And these technical narratives are what we are now terming the economic outcomes of our scenarios. So remember, in our journey narratives, we are giving birth to a baby, a girl called Sarah. So we are giving birth to this girl in 2022, and she comes to Kenya and finds this situation going on. And then now we give her an opportunity. The year is 2040. Have that up at the back of your mind. And we are telling Sarah she has options of opening 4 doors. So with every door that she opens, there is something she will experience that she can't relate with because she has lived that life. So Sarah comes and goes abroad, for example, and comes back to Kenya in 2040. What does Sarah see when she comes back to Kenya? So that is where our journey narratives come in. And then, of course, I mentioned Kwame will come with the technical narratives. So remember when I was giving a brief background, I mentioned that scenarios are possibilities. But these possibilities are not churned off something that is not realistic. They are churned off our reality. So this reality is what we are calling our picture of now. So as the IEA, we sat and we wrote a whole paper on what our picture of now is. What is our reality? And out of the reality that we wrote and thought through. And remember, that reality is what was actually happening in 2022. What were we experiencing as a country? So out of that, we then populated what you're seeing on your screen, the word cloud. And this word cloud, as you can see, has different small trends. And these small trends are what we are calling symptoms to a bigger trend. So the word cloud communicates to something bigger. So we have to sit back and think through and look at this word cloud and wonder, what is this word cloud telling us as a country? And what we realized, what the word cloud was telling us, was there was some level of constitutional implementation, and there was the side of economic potential. So when we looked at our constitutional implementation journey, what was it speaking to us about? It spoke to us about political tensions that were going on in the country at that time. Year is 2022. There was a lot of questions on how independent our judicial systems are. And so there's a conversation about judicial independence that was going on. And at that time in 2022, there was this conversation about constitutional amendments, given our BBI journey at that point. So all this put together spoke to our constitutional implementation. How far had we gone? And what level of of clarity did we have as far as that constitutional implementation was concerned? Were we following it to the letter, or were there issues that needed to be addressed? And then, of course, there was this side of economic potential. When you look at economic potential, at that point, there were issues of fiscal slippage. And we know what happens when there's fiscal slippage in a country. And then there was the debt management issue where our debt ceiling was being increased with every debt that we were taking. And so at that point, our debt management was a bit shaky. So it was hindering our economic potential. And then, without speaking too much about it, there was the COVID-19 shock. And we know what happened to our economy when COVID-19 hit. And it did not just hit Kenya, it was a global pandemic. So the global shock, the global economic shock that we experienced had a huge impact on what was happening in Kenya. So when you look at these two major pillars, the constitutional implementation and the economic potential, they speak to two things. At the IEA, we sat back and analyzed, what is this telling us? The constitutional implementation was speaking to our institutional independence, institutional renaissance, institutional decay. I will be explaining in the next slide. And then the economic potential was speaking to our policies. For us to experience our full economic potential, our policies had a huge role to play. And so when you look at these two central uncertainties, these are what form the basis of our scenarios. So the constitutional implementation spoke to our institutions, and the economic potential spoke to our policy. So bringing us to the two central uncertainties that I've explained in the previous slide. So when you look at the slide on your screen, we are speaking about institutional quality and the policy direction. So depending on which direction we took, something was going to happen to our economic development as a country. And remember, as we were crafting these scenarios, we are saying that we believe that our economic driver, our main economic driver, would be largely private sector led. So what level of support, what level of commitment are we getting from the private sector? Being guided by these two central uncertainties, the institutional quality or the policy direction. So we have two options for the institutional quality. We could either go the institutional renaissance direction, and we know what renaissance means. Renaissance means there's some level of rebirth, there's some level of restoration, there's some level of belief coming back in institutions that people did not believe in. And that can only happen when institutions are performing within their mandate. So we are saying because institutions are performing within their mandate, we are experiencing institutional renaissance. But if you go the other direction and institutions are not allowed to perform within their mandate, then we will be experiencing what we are calling institutional decay. And without saying too many things about it, we know what would happen if institutions are not performing within their mandate. Things would not work. And then when we look at the policy direction, we have two options. We can either go the progressive policy stance direction, where we are having policies that are very supportive to the economic development of this country. Or we could go the defensive policy stance, where we are making policies depending on what we stand. Our policy makers, Kenya's policy makers, are making policies depending on what they stand to gain. So they're not looking at the end game in terms of what are we benefiting as a country. They're looking at it in terms of what are they benefiting. So the policy is not supportive, okay? So when we move now to the scenarios, this is what happens when you combine these two central uncertainties. So we gave them different names, and we'll be explaining the names. So if Sarah opens the Madaraka realized door, so Sarah is at the center, which is the picture of now. Then she wakes up and opens this Madaraka realized door. what SARA experiences is institutional renaissance and progressive stances, where institutions are performing within their mandate and there's some level of independence that is being experienced, and the policies are also very supportive. If we moved, sorry, so Anna Madaraka realized, you notice we have SARA opens that door, and what she sees is judicial independence and efficacy. The judiciary is exercising its independence, and they are performing their mandate without interference from whatever other arm of government. And when we look at the state-owned enterprises reforms, we are seeing the likes of KQ being privatized. We are seeing state-owned enterprises that are performing similar responsibilities, similar mandate being amalgamated. She wakes up and opens that door, and what she witnesses is an improved tax administration where people are paying their taxes in time. Nobody is running away from paying taxes because the tax administration is very bearable for Kenyans. And then, of course, our debt, she doesn't wake up to a country without debt, but she wakes up to a country where the debt is very well managed. And we know what happens when our debt is well managed. So Madaraka realized we are talking about institutional renaissance and progressive policy stance. SARA could also open this door and wake up to manage stagnation. Under managed stagnation, SARA experiences institutional renaissance, but the policies are not supporting that renaissance. We are having defensive policy stances. What does that mean? We are saying we are having an efficient and effective public sector, but the policies are a bit stagnating, and we're having protectionist policies and regulations. What this then means for the private sector is because the policies are not very supportive, we have a largely underdeveloped private sector. And remember, we are saying that in 2040, we want to see an economy that is largely private sector led. And so when the the private sector is underdeveloped, we know what that means for our economic development. Then, of course, we proceed to the next scenario where SARA wakes up and opens the Juakali Kingdom door. Under the Juakali Kingdom door, we have progressive policy stances, and we do not have institutional renaissance. We are experiencing institutional decay. What does this mean? The policies that exist, we have a simplified tax regime, for example. Policies are actually very, very supportive. But on the other side, the institutions that are mandated to support these progressive policy stances are not performing within their mandate. We are experiencing a lack of goodwill, of political goodwill, and we know the importance of political goodwill to our country's economic development. And when we have a lack of political goodwill, that translates to a lack of confidence in the government entities. So Kenyans, SARA wakes up to a country that has citizens who lack confidence in government entities. So that's what she experiences in Juakali Kingdom. When she wakes up at the Eastern Sunset, SARA wakes up to a country where we have defensive policy stances and we have institutional decay. What does this mean? Nothing is working in this country. Things are on the slow. We have rigid labor policies. There's a lack of judicial independence. There is a broken constitutional order. We are not following the law as should. The constitution has just become a book that people are reading. Our public debt has breached the GDP, and we are really struggling with revenue collection. Our expenditures are a mess, and we need to keep borrowing. And because we keep borrowing, we keep breaking the debt ceiling. And then when we are not making good revenue collections, of course, the provision of public service goods, which is a responsibility of the government, there is a disruption to that. So things are not working under an Eastern Sunset. So this was just to unpack to you and make you understand, even as we now proceed to the economic outcomes of our scenarios, so that as somebody who is sitting back, we want you to picture Sarah, even as we introduce the economic scenarios, so that you try and relate what Sarah sees to what the data actually presents to us, because we believe that what Sarah saw is what was actually experienced, or what will actually be experienced in 2040, given the data and given constants in the variables that we used. So as we proceed, my colleague Kwame will come in and just now unpack to us the economic implication of what these scenarios actually mean. So Kwame, you can proceed with the economic outcomes. Thank you.
All right. Okay. Good morning, everyone. So Winnie has told us the narrative around what are the two major uncertainties. My apologies, we misspelled it on slide 7 as uncertainties, certainly not. So there's an I that's supposed to be out. So there are two central uncertainties. And the first one is just basically institutional quality and the changes in institutional quality expected between 2020 to 2024 on the one side. And the other is the policy direction. The connection or the intersection between those two give us 4 possible outcomes, starting with Madaraka Realized on the right, Juakali Kingdom, and Eastern Sunset, and Managed Stagnation. Now, Winnie has explained what each of those scenarios means, and obviously what that means is an intersection between the degree of institutional renaissance on the one side and the policy stance. So basically what our argument has been is that one and not the other, right? So we have institutional reforms on the one side, essential institutional reforms which have to be undertaken towards to prevent institutional decay, and at the same time, progressive policy stances. So one form of change must be matched by a different change to give us the outcomes that we expect. So because we have those 4 scenarios, so we have the Madaraka Realized, which would be substantial institutional renaissance on the one side and progressive policy stance gives the best possible outcome. And then the Juakali Kingdom would be where the progressive policy stance is taken, which is pro-market, but without institutional reforms. That leads to Juakali Kingdom. There'll be lack of confidence in government entities, simplified tax regime, but without institutional changes to go with that, then obviously institutional decay comes in. And then we have the Eastern Sunset, in which nothing happens. It's business as usual, and the existing conditions which people accept are not the best, starting from the picture of now, are allowed to go ahead, and it deteriorates into an Eastern Sunset. Managed stagnation would be one where political reforms are undertaken, institutional reforms are undertaken, institutions perform well, but it is not marked by progressive policy stance, which is pro-market to complement those changes. So that's the narrative. But we have to come back here as part of our stress test, or rather, as part of our testing, to say what would it mean for each of those. We have a clear normative and reasoned, rational view about what each of those 4 possible scenarios would be. But a sensitivity test is essential, using existing data and known methodology to tell us whether those outcomes that we propose would be sensible given existing methodologies for modeling, and at the same time what it would mean in quantitative terms. So that's what this second part of the presentation goes. So in the modeling methodology, which is proprietary rights of our partners, Oxford Economics, based in South Africa, we use, of course, what is called basically integrated global economic model. So you take the global economy as a whole. We understand that Kenya is a small open economy, and therefore some of the things that happen within Kenya's economy are themselves flows in and out from what happens globally. So we are conscious of the fact that Kenya is not an island in economic terms. So a fully integrated global economic model is usual. So individual country models are fully linked. So we are linked to global assumptions about trade volume, prices, competitiveness. And the second thing is this model applied by Oxford Economics, and which we use for providing reality and a sensitivity test to the 4 scenarios, has comprehensive country coverage. So already Oxford Economics has 80 countries that were examined in detail. plus the Eurozone. So each of them and their present connections to Kenya were used to test our models. I mean, to test the four scenarios. So going into our next, having talked about the global methodology, I mean, the modeling methodology. So basically, in applied economics, we use eclectic models, combining elements of various approaches and model types. So there's no single model that's used. We apply models on the basis of reason. And what we have, here we have what we call the output error model. And it's partly estimated. So you estimate some facts based on what you can see, and part of it is calibrated on the basis that you put in some facts about what you know, and you calibrate what certain outcomes would be. It is also structural in the sense that the equations that we put in represents our theory of how the general economy works. And that's pretty sensible and standard conventional economic theory. And it is an equilibrium model. An equilibrium model means you assume the existence of markets, which is facts, accounting identities, and behavioral equations consistent with optimal behavior. So basically, you're saying that, look, higher income growth is preferred to lower income growth. Farms prefer higher profitability, which comes from higher productivity and stuff like that. So that's basically it. And then we picture those into a scenarios analysis. So still complaining that, so the Oxford model, of course, is eclectic. It is Keynesian in the short term. In the short term, in the sense that because we are taking about a 21, 22-year time period, we are conscious that in that period there'll be shocks. And Kenya's economy has been subject to shocks, both internal and external. That's a factor of Kenya's history as well, but it's also something that is consistent. So we know that in the short run, it's Keynesian in the sense that in the short run, the things that matter are what government does to respond to shocks. But in the long term, what matters are the aggregates in the monetary sense, in terms of interest rates, in terms of exchange rates, and in terms of inflation. So those are the things that we take. So short run, we assume government will be able to respond in one way or the other. Over the long term, it's what the prices, which is basically saving inflation, interest rates, which is the price of borrowing money, and obviously exchange rate, which is the price of currency against others. So those things are essential here. And of course, shocks to demand will generate economic cycles, and those cycles obviously lead to error correction forms, which is basically one shock leads to a certain change, and those changes in turn obviously reverberate, and government responses lead towards restoration of economy. So that's it. Now, we took a little bit of time to still explain the modeling methodology. So in the next shock, now in modeling methodology as applied, we try to compare it with other macro models. So if you look at it on this spectrum, you see that you can have a theoretical structure of your model, and then of course how it fits with the data. So theoretical models are basically real business cycle models, which are basically taking account of the shocks. That's the RBC models. Those tend to be theoretical models. Policy models are output error, but at the same time, they assume a general equilibrium. And there are other people that use it. The Fed in the US, IMF, global institutions tend to have those policy models by assuming if a policy change takes place here, how does it affect such an outcome? And then the forecasting models are entirely quantitative. And they allow people to create forecasts for one or more variables with coefficients. And the ones that fit the data, as you go towards more forecasting models, then you try to fit the data more strictly. As you can tell, policy models are somewhere in the middle, and they're usually some of those that are most preferred for a conversation such as this. In the next, we talk about the modeling methodology, basically thrown as in terms of how the economy fits. So you can see effects on GDP, price costs, and all that. So the blue parts are outcomes, those that governments could influence at the top. So basically income, government finances, and the financial sector, and their interconnection with taxation, household income. So we have aggregate factors at the top. Then we see how it is connected through to GDP, prices and costs, international trade, and supply. So we see this is more or less like a schema showing how an economy is connected. And for Kenyan economy, so we're taking profits, household income, taxation, government spending, interest rates, and how they're connected one into the other, into the financial sector, into government finances and household incomes. Then back here, the supply factors, international trade, prices and costs, and how these lead from GDP. So the connection into the creation of GDP and how that works back into income, government finances, and financial sector. So this is just a schematic for how that happens. In the next, yes, so this modeling uses the most comprehensive model of its kind. As I said, it's about more than 80 countries, so 85 countries. And then you run simulations by asking, if this shock happens, what does it do under each of those scenarios, and you generate. So Oxford Economics has used this, and you can see for Kenya, they've applied more than 420 simulations because they try to do this for every other country. So basically, this is just like an explanation for the fact that there's sensible confidence in this model, given how widely they've applied it to other countries. And it's essential because, as we say, Kenya's characteristics is a small open economy and therefore subject to shocks that come from other parts of the world. Now, if we come down to this, so it merges qualitative futures approaches, which is the qualitative arguments that Winnie has given us for why one connection, institutional renaissance, is expected to be consistent with better growth, if at the same time it is matched with the right policies. So that would be perfectly the best fit based on historical analysis, good economics, sound economics, and also it's also based on Kenya's history. Whenever those two improvements in the institutional quality are armed at the same time with the improvements in economic policy, then we tend to see a surge. The reverse obviously leads to a different outcome. So it merges qualitative features approaches with rigorous macroeconomic modeling, part of which we've shown. It shows that economic outcomes would look like under each of those scenarios. So basically here we come from understanding what the model does, and now we're putting it under sensitivity tests for each of those scenarios, saying, fine, if this is what happens, what kind of expectations are there, put in the data, and you try to see what comes out of it. And it shows that economic outcomes would look like under each scenarios, and it facilitates deeper and more informed discussions, because then it doesn't just become someone's preference for whether you prefer Jua Kali or whether you prefer Madaraka or whether you have a preference for Eastern Sunset or stagnation, managed stagnation. Now, I'll take us back with that background in what the methodology says. Now, manage stagnation. I mean, to the economic scenario. So we remember that we have the four scenarios, starting with Madaraka, Realize on the right, top right, and then you have Jua Kali Kingdom on the bottom right. We have Eastern Sunset bottom left, and then managed stagnation. And you can tell how the intersection of our two critical uncertainties, policy stance on the one side and institutional change, results in one or two of those scenarios. So you can say that Madaraka Realized is positive economic renaissance, international institutional renaissance and positive policy stance. Jua Kali Kingdom is the halfway stage where the policy stance is okay, but institutional decay is allowed to happen. You get the Jua Kali Kingdom. On Eastern Sunset, it's the worst of both. Institutional decay and defensive policy stance gets an Eastern Sunset. And then obviously, under managed stagnation, again, the halfway case where the institutional relations is pushed ahead, but the policy stance is protectionist and defensive, and that leads to some kind of stagnation. So if you go now to each of those scenarios and try to see what it leads to, we are going here to what were some of the levers. And here, it's just a list about how this was tested. So potential institutional adjustments that are required, and then the levers that were adjusted in the model that existed. So it's reduction in fiscal slippage, which is basically the fiscal deficit, improvements to the institutional process, to the devolution process. So we are seeing institutional change, and we are seeing positive policy changes and how those will be adjusted in the model to create the outcomes that we expected. So under Madaraka Realized, these are the ones. And what we realized in the levels is that the favorable productivity shock due to improvements in human capital, obviously with better institutional endowments, it means obviously that managing, say, for instance, education sector budgets, managing education sector institutional quality would in itself lead to better human capital. And we see how that has a knock-on effect. So small businesses and favorable state enterprise reform on the policy side. So you see improvement in exports growth, reduction in government borrowing. Then you go now to an Eastern Sunset as well. So similar changes, what are the institutional changes and the policy changes? And then here we provide the levers that were adjusted in the model to give us the outcomes that should be seen. But let me just go straight now, having talked in theory. What does it tell us about the economic scenarios? Here, in the next slide, in slide 24, it's telling us whether when we've made all those adjustments based on the normative changes that we started with, the normative change questions that we had about those uncertainties and how they go. what does it tell us Kenya will look like in quantitative terms, in terms of annual GDP growth rates by the year 2040? And we'll start from an Eastern Sunset. Remember, an Eastern Sunset is one in which there's no change. All that happens, an Eastern Sunset is one in which we have an Eastern Sunset is one in which there's institutional decay and a defensive policy starts. Yes. So basically you have the worst of both worlds. And what it tells you is that from 2022, which was our start date, which is a picture of now, there's a sharp decline in growth rates, annual growth rates. Remember, in 2002, growth rates was about 3.8, about 4% per year. It falls sharply by 2024, which would be this year, to about 2 and 2.3%, and then starts to rise. But on the whole, by 2028, because the structural changes do not support, there's no change in policy, there's no change in structure, in institution structure, it goes down. So this is annual growth rates. So annual growth rates go back down to about 2%, which is equivalent to what population growth rates are in Kenya, GDP growth rates. On the other hand, if you have the Juakali Kingdom, remember for the Juakali Kingdom, the change is post-progressive policy stance, good economic policy, opening up and allowing for private sector to thrive, but at the same time, it lacks institutional decay for those reforms, for compliance, and obviously for effecting those policies. And what happens again here is a slight dip, right? Those small enterprises, you can call them the small and micro businesses or other businesses, all get a slight nudge, goes up by 4.1%, and then it starts to come down. But the general thing is that growth momentum is not maintained. It falls back in 2020-24, slight rises again, and you can see like that kind of fluctuation, and then it settles back at about 3.5% growth rates, which is hardly sufficient and to keep growth rates high enough to create structural transformation in Kenya. And then the managed stagnation period is basically where there's institutional renaissance, but policy stance does not. So here again, there's a change in political and other institutions between the different arms of government, creates a huge burst at the beginning, but then again, it fails to be sustained with proper economic policy. Remember, our main assumption is on the economic side, allowing private sector to thrive is essential for Kenya's prosperity. So yes, you create the proper institutional structure, but we failed, or rather, there's a creation of proper institutional renaissance or a desire for it, but it is unmatched with a policy stance that allows for markets to flourish. And so it flatters to deceive. And then by the year 2026 or 24, when it peaks, which would be about now at about 5%, which is close to where we are today. I hope it's not heading there. And then it begins a decisive step back down from 5.5% peak all the way back to just below 3%. I mean, just about 3%. Remember, this is a 20-year growth gap. So 2.5 percentage points change in GDP over 20 years is a lot of GDP growth rates, and we'll see what it means. And then on the other side, on Madaraka Realized, which is basically both institutional renaissance and positive progressive policy stance, there's a huge burst in growth. Remember, the burst in growth coming from 2020 is on account of the fact that there was a bounce back from COVID in 2020. So nearly every scenario, with the exception of Eastern Sunset, shows a bounce back. And then it fails to be sustained because one set of changes is made. But in the case of Madaraka Realized, there's both institutional change and good policy stance. And then it goes all the way up. It's maintained at about 5.5% by 2028, and then comes down and still comes back to about 4% growth rates per year, slightly closer to 4.5%, 4.3%. Remember, this is 4.3% per year, and the compounded effect is the most important as opposed to just one sharp change. So what does these four scenarios tell us would be the outcome in real economic terms? So if you go to the next slide, in slide 25, we see the scenarios again. So the unemployment rate, again, the unemployment rate under an Eastern Sunset, which was at about 28% up at the end of 2020, starts to go up, and it's up to about almost 32%. So employment rate rises under an Eastern Sunset. It's more or less stagnant under managed stagnation, slightly lower under Jokali Kingdom, and our best outcomes, in fact, it falls by more than half, close to half rather, from about 30%, 27%, all the way back down to about 18% at the time, by the end of 2014. Consumer price inflation, which is inflation, something that's concerned Kenyans over the last few years, is also worst under an Eastern Sunset, which means no change, falls slightly with the recovery of under COVID, but goes up and then stays stagnant under Jokali Kingdom. Same, but at a lower rate under managed stagnation. And the best outcome in terms of CPI and inflation is still at about 4%, which would be really, really excellent. Maintained for close to 15 years at a lower rate of about 4% is much, much better than Kenya has ever done since independence. Now, we come to public debt. Again, public debt would expand substantially under Jokali. So Jokali is Eastern Sunset, which is possibly our worst. Then managed stagnation, public debt would arise. Again, Jokali Kingdom, the best outcome again in terms of public debt would rise from about 75 to about 60. Remember, even if it comes down to about 60, Kenya's government's intention is to keep it at 55% of GDP in net present value terms. But remember, this is a bigger economy. And so with real growth taking place, it's possible that the debt management would actually be soundly in here. But I think the real picture that you need to take is the bottom picture on the left. Here, it's telling us basically what the quantitative change in income per person would be for each of those scenarios. And here you can tell, again, what it would be for each of the for each decade up until that time. So you see here that under Madaraka Realized, which is basically the best, Kenya's income at the end of 2014 would be about $6,000 in present value terms. In 2020, when you bring that, suggesting almost 3 times as much income per person as it was. I think a growth rate of about 280%. It means people would be 280%, every individual wealthier relative to what the position was. But it tells you between 2020 right up to that, most of the gains would be in the first 10 years because of changes in both the economic policy and changes in the structural institutional policy. Most of that change would occur then. But it starts with the fact that for each of those scenarios, it's more or less the same, right? Change would be almost the same. But it's a second decade after that, the blue chart, and then the grayish one. So you can see that for each of these in the first 10 years, there wouldn't be much difference, but the differences start to show because it piles up additionally, substantial amounts over time, telling you that institutional reforms and economic policy reforms have an increasing return aspect. Managed stagnation as well. So there's not much change over each of those, but you can tell that in the first decade, more than half of the gains that Kenyans will gain will come in the last 12 years of between now and 2040, telling you that increased change in the beginning then tends to have an incremental effect because it leads to the momentum for leaders. Eastern Sunset obviously tells us that there'll be barely much change in the income levels between Kenyans between 2020 and 2040. There'll be changes, but the incremental effect is much, much less. It's less than 50% higher than what it should have been otherwise. I think this is the biggest picture because here, this is where the methodology gives us some value. And what it gives us the value is what the real changes in income, which would be almost at about 2004 and an Eastern Sunset, and the possibility close to 6,000. So the differences would be almost $3,500 change per person in terms of income differences between the two extremes, and Eastern Sunset and Madaraka Realized. The others and the managed stagnation will be there, but obviously not as big. But what it tries to show is the incremental effect that occurs from sustaining reforms for close to 20 years. And what that tells us is why institutional reforms together with the economic policy reforms are essential. They're not alternatives, but they go together because they reinforce each other over the medium to long term. Yeah, that's it. Thank you.
All right, so thank you, Kwame, for unpacking to us the economic outcomes of these scenarios. So we will be allowing this for plenary. If you have any question, this is the time to ask a question. You can also type your question in the chat box, should you have any. So you can raise your hand and you will be given rights to voice it, or you can type it in the chat box. Anyone with a question? We seem not to be having a question. I'm not seeing any hand raised. And I'm not seeing any in the chat box. Let me... We don't have any hand raised and we don't have any question in the chat box. So our assumption then is, oh, there's a question. Oh, thank you, Hassan. Thank you for being kind. Hassan says, wonderful presentation. So we clearly do not have any. Atlin, how can you get the presentation? It will be on our portal, on our website shortly, and you can access the report on our website as well, the full report. So you can go to our website at ieakenya.or.ke, access the presentation and as well the full report, where you can just read through slowly and internalize what Kwame and I have discussed. And okay, so Justus is asking, what is the most important takeaway for the public and civil society? So Justus, in my view, the most important takeaway for me out of these scenarios relating to civil society is the relation, like we have mentioned, between institutions and policies. So as we try to get the policies right, you've seen civil society trying to hold office bearers to account and just trying to ensure that public offices are performing within their mandate. So just unpacking this and them being able to understand that the work they're doing in terms of ensuring that institutions are performing within their mandate, and also just ensuring that they are pushing for policies that are actually reinforcing institutions to perform within their mandate is very, very critical in our economic development. Remember, we're not saying one can replace the other, but they need to work together. So civil society can make that push and just make sure that the work they're doing is really noticeable and very, very critical as far as ensuring institutional renaissance is concerned, and ensuring that the policies that are passed by our public, by the public bearers are actually policies that would actually steer us in the right direction economically. Kwame would respond to that in a bit, and then somebody asked, Hassan is asking, as per your analysis, does it mean that Kenya is becoming decade in coming decade is likely to be placed between Juakali and managed stagnation? Hassan, of course, Kwame will be responding as well in a bit, but Hassan, remember what we mentioned, that these policies are not predictive. They just are possibilities of what would happen. So as we are unpacking these scenarios, we'd also want you to internalize and look at where we are now and try to imagine, are we at Juakali Kingdom or managed stagnation? in my opinion, I've always believed that we are in a mix of Jua Kali kingdom and managed stagnation, because we have instances where institutions are performing within their mandate, but the policies are not good, strong enough, and we have instances where policies are in existence, but the institutions mandated to ensure these policies are implemented and not performing within the mandate. So I would say we are in between. So Kwame would give his views on those two, then we'll proceed to the next two questions. Kwame?
Okay, thanks. Well, I think there are two questions. So the first one is, what would be the main insights what would be the main takeaway? I think the first takeaway is this, that Kenya is the picture of now is a country that needs reform. And when a country needs reform, there's a tendency to take the easy path, which is to either do one kind of reforms and leave the others. That's not going to work. So if you sit in Kenya today and you see some of the things that it's telling us more recently is we need both institutional reforms for all arms of government and all institutions to do their jobs well and independently. That's one. And at the same time, to support that with proper economic policy reforms so that those two go together. The choice to take one and not the other will not work. And if you've had this administration and some of its biggest, most eloquent speakers, they say that, look, we can put courts in their place so that we can fix the economy. That's a cop-out, that's a halfway house. It might be convenient politically. It's going to lead us to one or the other. So basically, one scenario and the other. So that's a first. So what do we wish? If our wish is to have Madaraka realized, it means those of us who sit as CSOs have to understand what direction do we push our policy messaging towards. And that policy messaging, in my view, has to be one that allows for private sector performance, competitiveness, and secondly, we have to be careful about being told that the only reason government, for instance, or things are not working is because the courts, for instance, or because the EACC or any one institution doesn't work. So I think if there's corruption in the judiciary, for instance, scapegoating is not useful, but if there is, there are institutions that should deal with that. But we cannot take shortcuts for the purposes of ensuring that we need a short route outside what the Constitution requires and what the law requires. It is a hard job. It is basically as if we have a big jigsaw puzzle to put together, and each piece must be put in its right place, one after the other. Any attempt to try and hasten it by getting a shortcut is unlikely to get us where we are. And you've had some of the vibes. Blame one department or the other and all that. So here, whether it's the police, whether it's the courts, whether it's parliament, whether it's the executive, everybody needs to perform their role. And we need to think about that in that wholesome way. I think to take a reductionist approach, which is let's leave everything as it is and let's just get the economy rushing, which is very, very might be very persuasive in the moment, is unlikely to lead us. And you can see, it can give you one short burst, such as what we've seen before. Corruption doesn't matter, provided we get fertilizer out there. We had an additional 20 million bags. I doubt it, but we are being told that we had an additional 28 million or so bags, and we have a record harvest. Maybe that's true. But because of that, let's leave corruption aside for the time being and all that. I think all state institutions need to do their job regardless. So the belief that if we suspend any chance for corruption in the judiciary, in the executive, in parliament, and all that, so that we can solve the economic problem, I think we'd be selling ourselves short. So that's the idea. The idea is that the difficult work of state building and consolidating Kenya's constitutional journey, which was started 14 years ago, must continue. It's not something that can be suspended for the time being to get a big project in, be it the one levy, one social housing thing, one health thing and everything else. All those laws and the entire step must be taken. So if we start to believe that the Constitution has become too burdensome, I think we're making a mistake. On the other hand, if we start to believe that only economic performance matters, we know how it will go. It might still end up with those undesired. Winnie, please place the schema on the whatever's together so that we can see the four scenarios. People need to be able to see the four scenarios as we refer to them. So that's basically it. The second question was about whether we are in which scenario are we in and which are we heading towards. I think, scenarios are not deterministic. I think the only deterministic thing is this. So the only deterministic thing is what we do. So right now you can say, yes, we are tottering somewhere between Jokali Kingdom and managed stagnation, because some changes are being made and they're heading towards it. And the other side, we see a defensive policy stance and all that. But the point is, where we get to will be the result of many different trends and many different actions boiled together and given force over the next 20 years. So that will be the outcome. But you can see, yes, some of the preferences that we have now and some of the ways in which it is being pushed is a progressive economic policy stance, but without the need to institutionally reform. And that's a halfway house. Or to believe that the only institutional reform we need is to fix the judiciary, or say to fix the ESCC, or to fix the police. I think it has to be many things going together. As you can see, institutional decay was best demonstrated to us in the fact that everybody seems to think that it is okay to say that floods are an act of God. I think those are one of the reasons we have government, to fix the public goods that are required so that when you face a disaster, we don't accept deaths as a given by saying that by 4,000 Kenyans die every day. So those are very reckless statements to make. I think we cannot start to justify government failure by saying that death is an inevitable outcome of human life. We have to be very, very careful by saying, are these preventable? How did government emergency operations go? They didn't go too well, to be honest. And I hope we don't hear 2 months down the line that there's been some corruption around that. So those systemic things have to be fixed hand in hand with the fact that, yes, we have no direct control about whether there'll be floods another 2 weeks from today. But when another institution, remember, institutional renaissance means if you have the Met Department, which is authorized to call out for when we might have floods, then the preparations and emergency preparations should be pushed in, and we cannot then say that we forbid them from using words such as El Nino because we said prayers, or we forbid them from actually giving a proper judgment. All those institutions have to be given the opportunity to do their jobs. That information is necessary, so we have an early warning, and when an early warning is issued, the institutions that come in with emergency care need to come in on time without making this the blame of one political party or the other. All things have to work together in a way that delivers that. And so far, it suggests to us that, yes, the proper mix or the proper balance has not been achieved. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Justice and Olunga, I think Kwame's what Kwame has just said has answered a bit of your questions as well. And then Philbert, you say, thank you for the amazing work you guys are doing. I would love to see IEA do more work around foresight, thinking, and the tools. It is a very interesting way to imagine the future of our country and how to get to the Madaraka realized scenario. So Philbert, thank you very much for this feedback. And we'd also like to interest you that we will be holding a master's class on futures and foresights, just to enlighten you on how you can possibly use the futures and foresights tools. And we will be sending out flyers very, very soon. So please look out for it and register, and we can engage further and just share our insights as you also share your insights on what you think about futures, futures methodologies and the different scenarios building techniques that we will be taking you through during the masterclass. So please look out for that. And then Moses, you say, thank you for the presentation and the work put into it. We appreciate. With Jokali Kingdom being huge in the Kenyan economy, what does this mean to our entrepreneurship and scaling it up to compete at a higher level? And what can be done by the Jokali participants on the same? Will the prior learning aspect work towards a higher effective Jokali? Kwame?
Okay. Well, I don't know what Moses means. By using Jokali Kingdom, we were not using Jokali in a pejorative sense. The reason we call it a Jua Kali kingdom is there are certain attributes of Jua Kali businesses. And remember, they're businesses. They provide employment for people. But even those who work among them would like to see them scaled up, work in far better conditions, earn more regular incomes, and lead to some kind of structural change within Kenya's economy. So by that, what we mean is that the fragmented nature of those businesses without the ability to consolidate could result from whether you have a progressive policy stance where you're trying to get businesses to be competitive, but you don't have the institutional structure to enable them. For instance, if business registration, for instance, does not take place, if government is unable to provide the infrastructure that businesses need, because people establish businesses because they have ideas and they need to earn a living, and they have those ideas and they work. But the scaling of those businesses, providing certainty in policy outcomes. So for instance, if you look at what's happening today, you enable businesses to do that at the same time as a very inefficient taxation structure, which might require a different way of thinking and modeling for taxation collection and for providing business services to them. That's it. So the idea was that increased fragmentation of businesses will occur from the inability or from the reluctance to establish proper institutional structure. So for instance, if you look at the property rights, people think that the only thing that happened is that people lost lives, and there were about 300 of them. That's really, really sad. And we had a day for praying for people who lost their lives. But lives and homes were swept, but so were businesses, because for some people, their businesses also are in the premises in which they live, or their businesses are also in certain places. So that failure of public services and public goods, which could evacuate water safely away from places where people live and all that, has damaged the businesses of some people, or even their income, the ability to earn income over time. Remember that even small-scale farmers who farm in their farms and then take up that produce and use it for their business in the markets. Those two are businesses, and institutional decay affects them by farms being swept away, property being swept away. As you can see in some places, basically cattle were drowned or swept away into pieces, property was spoiled. So that's basically what we mean. So it creates increased fragmentation, and the vulnerability of business people continues because there are no formal systems to help them to stabilize those businesses and to grow them over time. So that's what we mean, Moses. It's not to use Jua Kali in a pejorative way. Are there Jua Kali businesses? There are, and there are many. They're not huge by virtue of each of them being huge. They're huge because there are many and they're fragmented. So that fragmentation will continue without institutional strengthening, basically without institutional support that's required. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much, Kwame. I do not think we have any other question. We have been able to respond to all your questions, and I think Moses is satisfied with the response we have given. And yeah, so that was it for us for today, just to have this conversation and just to awaken you to what you can be able to achieve using futures methodologies and scenarios building techniques in your works. And like I've mentioned, the IEA will be holding a masterclass where we will be taking you through scenarios building techniques and methodologies. And I've posted my email address. If you would be interested in attending this masterclass, please write to me and I will guide you through the process of registering for it, and we can see how we can go about it. So without saying too much, we want to appreciate you for joining us for this conversation this morning and sparing your 2 hours with us. And tomorrow, we will be having another webinar discussing understanding pass-through cost of electricity prices. And we would be very glad if you could, again, spare time to join us. So please, let's meet again tomorrow and have a conversation. And let's talk electricity tomorrow. So thank you so much. And please do enjoy the rest of your day. Asanteni sana. You may leave at your pleasure. Asante.